Friday the 13th, Road Trip. Chapter 17, Fear.
Teddy bobbed his head up and down, watching with fascination as the stinger on his buzzy mask threaded in and out of Missy's guts. He couldn't get over the amazement. She was the captain of the cheerleading team, and he had killed her. That was even more impressive than dating her. For years, Teddy had dreamed of showing up at school with one of these cheerleaders on his arm. Wouldn't it be great to waltz into the cafeteria with Missy, Summer, or Belinda? Buzzy, buzzy, buzzy. The chant would spring up. But then the mouths of every single student would drop open in unison as he led the beautiful girl into the room. Teddy sighed. Well, he would never fulfill that fantasy now. At least not with Missy. In his mind, the fantasy changed. This time, he was walking into the cafeteria with Missy's corpse. Actually, that seemed just as good a way to shut up the rest of the students. He got up off what was left of Missy Lowe's body and removed the blood-stained bee head, revealing his white hockey mask underneath. It stuck to his face so tightly, it was as if it were trying to embed itself deep into his skin. He heard the soft fluttering of bat wings. The bats smelled blood, he realized. Good. They would clean up the mess. He looked across the field, past the burned-out wreckage of the various amusement rides. He could see the forest where he knew the old Crystal Lake campgrounds lay. Missy had been a dream date come true. 5 more dates were waiting. Russ had tromped around the campgrounds twice already, or so it seemed. There were so many trails, so many hidden cabins, he wasn't sure where he was anymore. At one point, he had come across a large, boarded-up building that appeared to be the old camp's main lodge. That building was latched shut, so he didn't bother looking inside for his girlfriend. Then, when he had just about given up hope of finding Belinda, he saw her. She was sitting on the dilapidated porch of a cabin, her head in her hands. Russ walked slowly toward her. She still didn't look up. "Didn't you hear me calling? I was calling at you all this time." She raised her head and glared at him in silent fury. Russ had been going out with Belinda most of the year, and he still hadn't got over how beautiful she was. Even now, when he was mad at her and feeling fed up with her, he was still struck by the sight of her. Her skin was the color of mocha, and she had had this heart-shaped face with high cheekbones. "Do you know how ridiculous you're being?" he asked. She didn't answer that question, which didn't surprise him. It was pretty typical. She never let him in. He sat down next to her. "Belinda," he said, "it wasn't my idea to play that game. And you went first. You kissed Slick pretty good, too." "Shut up," she said without looking at him. Then she lifted her head and pointed her finger at him angrily. "You will not speak until I tell you." Russ felt his eyebrows shoot up. Apparently his expression got through to her because she started to laugh. He laughed too. "You are really getting out of hand, you know that?" he asked. "You are," she retorted. "I'm serious," he said. "I'm worried about you." "Oh, now, don't start that worried stuff again," Belinda said. "But I am," he told her. "I'm worried about you. You try to control everything. You try to control me. You try to control yourself. Our school does have such a thing as a guidance counselor, you know that." "Look," Belinda said, her eyes flashing, "I don't need a guidance counselor. It just made me jealous to see you kissing Summer. Just kissing her like that. Now you can say it's crazy, but tell that to my heart, okay?" "Belinda," he said, "there's more than just that kiss going down here. Look at the way you order me around. You're always telling me what to do, and even more often you're telling me what not to do. I mean, what are you afraid of?" He waited for a response, but got none, unless you counted the sounds Russ heard in the forest. Something was moving in the pitch-black woods that surrounded them on all sides. He and Belinda both picked up their heads, listening. "Probably just a deer," he explained to Belinda. Not hearing anything anymore, Russ went on. "I'm serious, Belinda. Tell me what you're afraid of." Belinda bit her lip. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I'm awful." Russ's heart softened. When she talked like that, it made him love her again. "You're not awful, beautiful." "I am." "You're just scared, which brings me back to my question. Of what?" "I'm not afraid of anything," she insisted. "Yeah, you are," Russ said, "and that's okay. But if you could just say what it is, then maybe you wouldn't have to act out." He waited. She didn't say a word. He sighed. "Listen," he said, "I think I know what it is." "Don't you say a word," she warned. "Not about that." He ignored her instructions. "It's because of your daddy, isn't it?" "Russ!" She had that finger of hers in his face, threatening him, but he went on anyway. "You think that because your daddy abandoned you and your mother, that all men are going to leave you, don't you? That's what you're afraid of. Now, isn't it?" Belinda made a fist as if to strike him, but then opened her hand and caressed his cheek. "Please stop," she said, and as if to make sure he didn't say another word, she leaned over and planted a soft kiss on his lips. "What was that for?" he asked when she sat back. She smiled. "That's for being good." The way she talked, it was as if he were 7, not 16. But the kiss had gotten to him nevertheless. He couldn't resist. They were sitting so close out there in the dark, all alone. "How good?" he asked, picking up her baby tone. She always liked that when he talked baby talk. "Good enough for another kiss?" he asked. She glanced up at him, then nodded. He moved in slowly, putting an arm around her. It was crazy. She was so small compared to him. He could have lifted her in the air with one hand, and yet she held such power over him. His lips found hers. It wasn't much of a kiss. She was keeping her mouth tightly closed. He pulled his head back. "I think I've been better than that," he said. She laughed, and they started kissing again, and this time she let him really kiss her. And the next thing he knew, he was lowering her down to the splintery, wet floor of the porch. His hands began to roam, and the excitement flooded through him in giant waves, and Belinda pulled away sharply. "I didn't say you could do that," she said breathlessly. Russ was breathing pretty heavily himself. When he caught his breath, he said, "Belinda, you're not my kindergarten teacher. You know that?" "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means the way you treat me. You can do this if you're good, then you can't do that. I mean, it's ridiculous, Belinda." He sat up, frustrated and annoyed. Behind him in the cabin, he heard the floorboards creak, but he was too preoccupied to care. "Don't pout," she ordered. He didn't answer. She was right. He was pouting. He couldn't help it. He was feeling a terrible, frustrated ache. In its own way, it hurt worse than getting smacked on the football field by a giant blocker. He knew which pain he preferred anyway. "Look," Belinda told him, "it's your choice. You can do this my way, or you won't do it at all." "Walk away," Russ told himself. Just get up and tell her to forget the whole goddamn thing and walk away. But instead, he couldn't resist asking, "Do what exactly?" Belinda smiled and licked her lips. "That depends on how good you are." Russ was lying on his back. He stared up at the cobwebbed roof of the porch. The ache of frustration was beginning to ease, and with the lessening of the pain, some of his powers of reasoning had returned. He stood. "I guess we're not doing anything, then," he said. Feeling strangely exhilarated, he stepped off the porch and headed for the woods. He got about halfway down the worn dirt trail that led to the forest before Belinda called to him. "Where are you going?" I'm going back to the van, he told her, turning only briefly. It's over, he told himself. The thought made him feel tremendously free. He could break up with her. He wouldn't have to play any of her silly games ever again. Fact was, he could still feel Summer's kiss on his lips. Belinda balled her hands into fists. She couldn't believe Russ was just walking away like that. She willed him to turn around, but his large, lumbering shape disappeared into the woods, merged with the shadows, and was gone. She wanted to call out to him, but she forced herself to hold the words in. She would keep control. She would keep control. She had to clench her fists tighter until her long nails started to pierce the skin of her palms. But she kept quiet, and eventually the impulse to shout after Russ was gone. Good. As much as she wanted Russ to come back, the thought of showing him her true feelings, her weakness, was way too awful. Belinda decided that she'd sit for at least 10 minutes or so, just to make sure Russ didn't feel like he'd won when she came back through the woods to the van. But just then she heard a sound in the cabin right behind her. Her head twisted toward the sound. It almost sounded as if a coin had dropped onto the cabin floor. She heard the rattling sound that a coin made when it spun to a stop. "Who's there?" she asked. "Slick? Dave?" Probably both of them trying to play a trick on her and scare her. Well, she wasn't going to let them win that game. That was for damn sure. She stood. She was facing the large black rectangle of a doorway. The open space looked like the lid of a coffin. Everything in her body cried, "Run! Run, Belinda!" But she couldn't give in to her baser instincts like that. She had to show her body who was boss. She took a cautious step inside the cabin. It was hard to see, and before her eyes could adjust to the deeper darkness of the cabin, she heard another sound, a clink, like another coin had been dropped on the left side of the cabin. She peered into the corner, but there was nothing there, just some more of those ugly metal bunk beds, which meant she spun to her right, her heart suddenly pounding. She was sure that Slick or Dave had thrown the coin over to the left side of the cabin. That was an old trick. They threw something to get you to turn your head. Then they came up behind you. But there was no one lurking in the shadows on the right side of the cabin. No Slick, no Dave. No, what was the name of that guy that Slick had told them about? Jonesy Voorhees or something? She walked farther into the dark recesses of the cabin. She wanted to prove two things. One, that she was really alone, and two, that she could conquer her fears. She did one entire lap of the cabin's pitch-dark walls. "You see," she told herself, "you're letting your mind play tricks on you. There were no coins." Then she returned to the center of the cabin floor. "Okay," she was thinking, "you did it. Belinda, now get out, girl." Because coins or no coins, there was still something awfully eerie about this cabin. Evil, even. And enough was enough. Which is exactly why Belinda forced herself to keep standing right where she was, right smack in the center of the cabin. She told herself she would stand there until all fear had left her, however long it took. As she stood, she found herself staring down. There was something shiny at her feet. A penny. It was the coin she had heard dropping a few seconds before, making the sound that had brought her into the cabin in the first place. And then all at once an awful thought rushed through her brain. She had checked the left side of the cabin. She had checked the right side, but she hadn't checked. Overhead, something stirred. Belinda looked up just in time to see the man swing down to meet her. The face was hidden behind a white hockey mask. The white head smacked right into hers, bumping her hard and dazing her. She staggered, barely able to take in what she was seeing. There was someone hanging upside down like a bat from the rafters. And this masked figure was holding something iron. And then the man in the mask swung the iron thing, aiming right at the base of her skull. Chapter 18. You gotta see this. Cool, Slick exclaimed. Summer must have taken the wrong trail back from the lake, because they didn't find the horseshoe of old cabins. Instead, they came out in front of a large, run-down building with a carved wooden sign that said Lodge. Slick had climbed up onto the porch. The windows were all boarded up with unpainted plywood. Slick had pried one of the slats back with his hands and was peering inside. You gotta see this, he called. Summer stood at the base of the path, her hands in her pockets. Slick, she called. They're probably going crazy looking for us. A dark, jagged shape wheeled jerkily through the darkness over her head. It went by so fast that Summer couldn't be sure what she'd seen. Was that a bat? Slick, come on, she said, with a new urgency. She'd never been afraid of animals, but bats and rats were two exceptions. One summer back in Carville, a bat had gotten into their attic and had wriggled under her bedroom door at night. And when she sat up, shouting, and turned on the light, she came face to face with that tiny, crumpled, dark face with its beady, unseeing eyes. The bat had swooped in crazy circles around her small room. That night, it had taken 3 of her brothers, all armed with tennis rackets, to subdue the tiny creature. They had also managed to subdue her lamp and 2 paintings, and everyone ended up laughing about the incident. But for months afterward, she'd had this recurring nightmare in which she was kissing Slick passionately, and then opened her eyes and found she was making out with a bat. Slick, she called, please. But he was trying the door now. It was latched. Thank goodness, thought Summer. But Slick wasn't giving up, and with a few hard yanks he managed to pull the rusted hasp loose from the rotted wood in the door frame. He stared into the darkness beyond the door. All right, Summer, you've got to see this. I've never seen so many spider webs in my life. It's like a ghost town in here. Slick, I said I want to get back. And there's an old piano, and, ooh, too cool. Summer, I think there are still some camp pictures on the walls. You've got to check this out. No, Slick, I don't. He turned back and gave her his most seductive and devilish grin. There's a sofa, he said. Then he stepped backward into the darkness, vanishing like a magician in a stage show. Slick! He didn't answer her. She knew why. He was waiting. Probably waiting on the sofa, too. She tried to shake that image from her mind, but once she had thought of it, it kept a tenacious grip on her, as if the image had talons that were sinking into the soft tissue of her brain. She could picture just how it would go if she went inside that lodge. That was one of the things that had helped Slick seduce her all of these times. When he got that certain look in his eye, she could picture just what he had in mind. He would be lying there, one leg dangling off the edge of the sofa. Maybe he would have taken off his t-shirt, and he would be smiling. She took a step out of the woods towards the lodge. She yelled at herself not to go any farther. But now she was picturing the time. That magic time. The very first time he had taken her up to his attic. He had gone up the stairs ahead of her. When she came up into the attic, it was dark. Slick, she had whispered. He had sprung at her from behind, spinning her around, pushing her up against the attic's slanting wall, pressing himself against her. She shouldn't be thinking about that first kiss right now. She'd be a goner if she thought about stuff like that. As if clinging to her last hope, Summer reached behind her to hold on to the tree she had just passed. Instead, her hands touched a human face. Chapter 19, Wrestling. Summer screamed as two hands closed around her waist, pulling her roughly into the darkness. She kept screaming, but the hands closed around her mouth. "Stop it," Dave whispered, laughing. "Quiet. I want to scare Slick. Where is he?" Now that Dave had taken his hands off her mouth, Summer covered her mouth with her own hands. She felt like otherwise her heart would leap right out of her throat. She was so scared. Dave chuckled. "I really got you, huh?" "You're the world's biggest fungus brain," Summer told him. "I'm serious. How do you remember all those plays in football when you have nothing inside that damn head of yours?" But he just kept laughing. There was no point trying to insult him. He was feeling so proud of his little stunt that he was immune to insult. "Slick's in the lodge," she said. "Go scare the shit out of him, would you?" Dave grinned. "You bet." But before he could take 3 steps toward the lodge, Slick sprang out from inside the lodge, shouting so loudly that Summer almost fainted. At least this time, Dave got scared too. He fell to the wet grass and started laughing. "Oh, man, you got me," he said. "You got me, man. How did you know I was coming?" "You wusses," Slick said, shaking his head. "How stupid do you think I am? You don't think I heard Summer screaming? Anyway, voices carry really well in this country air." "But Dave, you gotta see this place," he added, heading back inside the lodge. "It's so creepy." Dave picked up a rock and winged it at the building. It bounced off one of the boarded-up windows with a hollow thud. "I gotta go find Missy," he said. "And then we all better head back. You guys seen Russ and Belinda?" Summer said she hadn't. Dave rolled his eyes. "She's probably giving him the business somewhere." "And not the good kind of business," Slick said from inside the lodge. He was right. Voices did carry. Dave disappeared back into the woods. Summer glanced toward the lodge. The dark open doorway. Beyond that door lay Slick and danger. She looked back into the dark woods. "Dave?" she called. There was no answer. "We'll meet you back in the van," she called. Then she turned and walked up the grassy slope toward the lodge. Dave followed the winding trail, letting it lead him through the woods. He yelled for Missy, for Russ, for Belinda, for anybody. The trail brought him to a small square building. Through the screen door, Dave could just make out the glint of porcelain. A row of sinks. Outhouse. The sight reminded him instantly of how long it had been since he'd been to the bathroom. He climbed the 2 cinder-block steps and went in, letting the door cling shut behind him. Inside, the bathroom smelled putrid and there was no light. Groping with his hands, he found a wall switch, which of course didn't work. Great. More groping as he worked his way like a blind man over to the stalls. Maybe he should go back outside and go to the bathroom in the woods, where at least there was some moonlight trickling down through the leaves. Nah, he decided. The dark bathroom was safer. Out there, he might wipe himself with poison ivy or run into a bear. Looking at the way he was talking, like that pansy Buzzy Bateman. Well, it wasn't his fault. A night spent roaming around in the dark woods was bound to shake up anybody. He opened the first stall door, started inside. Then he froze. As dark as it was in the stall, he could still see that there was someone sitting on the toilet. "This stall's occupied," said a deep voice. "Russ?" Dave said and cackled. "Fancy meeting you here, man." "Close the door, would you?" Dave laughed harder. Opening stall doors on guys who were going to the toilet was pretty standard fare in the locker room after football practice. Their favorite target was Buzzy, of course. But in this place, "What's the difference?" Dave asked. "It's so dark in here I can't see my own body." "Just close it." Dave obliged. He groped his way to the next stall, unbuckled his pants, and sat down on the toilet, breathing a sigh of relief. He could feel every single tackle he'd received in this afternoon's game. He needed to get in a whirlpool. "Is there any toilet paper in this hellhole?" he asked Russ through the stall wall. "Nah," Russ said glumly, "and the water's not running either." "Excellent," Dave retorted. "I know," said Russ. "That Teddy, man," grumbled Dave. "He messes up everything he touches. Figures he would get us lost." Russ didn't answer. The way he protected Buzzy, it was like the guy was in love with him or something. "You find Belinda, man?" Dave asked. "Yeah," said Russ. "And?" Dave asked again. "And what?" Russ answered. "Did you guys make up?" Russ didn't answer right away. "No," he said finally. Dave whistled. "I don't know why you take her. Man, you just take so much shit from her. I just don't understand it. I mean, you're bigger than her, Russ. You know that, right?" Dave heard Russ moving around in the next stall, heard the clomp of Russ's work boots on the floor. Then he heard him zipping his pants. "I'm going out to look for some wet leaves," Russ told him. "Gross, dude." "You better do the same, man," Russ said. "Otherwise, I'm not riding back in the van with you." Dave chortled. Russ was all right for a black guy. The latrine screen door swung open, then clanged shut once more. Dave relaxed. Then the screen door opened again. "Russ?" No response. Footsteps. The door to his stall flew open. For an instant, Dave figured it was Russ, and that Russ was just getting him back for opening the door on him. Then Dave managed to see the outlines of the person who stood in front of his stall, and see the white mask on the guy's face, and his stomach heaved. It was good he was sitting on a toilet, because otherwise he would have gone to the bathroom in his pants. A hand suddenly shot out of nowhere and punched Dave in the throat. The hand didn't let go either. It pinned his head back against the flimsy plywood wall of the bathroom, choking him. Dave's two hands came up to pull the attacker's single hand off of his neck. Dave was a strong guy. He did the Nautilus circuit at the school gym 3 times a week, but he couldn't budge that hand. He also couldn't breathe, which meant he was getting weaker. He began to black out when the hand suddenly let go. Dave gasped and choked, falling forward. Then he felt the hand close its iron grip on his red, wavy hair. The guy in the mask yanked. Dave was pulled forward. He fell off the toilet, landing at his attacker's feet. And he saw a very strange thing. Ked's purple high tops. The big, goofy kind Buzzy always wore. The kind that made Buzzy look even more like a bozo. But this couldn't be Buzzy, because there was no way Buzzy could be strong enough to pull him right up off the floor and bash Dave's head first against one side of the metal stall and then back against the other. And then the guy stepped into the stall with him. The man in the mask grabbed Dave with both hands, lifted him, and turned him, and all at once Dave knew what the guy was trying to do. And even though he hadn't fully recovered from the choking yet, or from getting his head bashed, he began to buck with all of his might. Because there was no way this guy was going to get his head into that filthy damn toilet. But the man in the mask was so strong. Dave's head was going down. The smell came up to meet him. It had a more powerful effect on him than smelling salts. He kicked backward like a goat and managed to catch the guy hard in the groin. He heard a low groan. Dave didn't waste a second. He struggled to his feet, turning and punching at the same time. He hit the guy in the face with all of his might and nearly broke his own hand on the mask. But he didn't stop for a second. He just flailed away with his good hand, the unhurt left, pummeling the man in the mask in the throat, in the stomach, landing 2 more low blows just for good measure. The masked figure backed out of the stall into the washroom. Dave followed, karate kicking with all of his might. His boot caught the masked man just under the chin, a blow that should have killed him. The guy went flying back into the row of sinks, cracking his head against the long row of mirrors that Dave hadn't even known was there. The glass shattered. But instead of dying, the attacker pushed off the sinks and charged, lowering his masked head. Maybe it was Buzzy after all, because who else but a dork would be so dumb as to come in so low like that? With the same ease with which he had avoided Thompson's blitz this afternoon, Dave easily sidestepped the onrushing attacker, and as the figure went by, he chopped down on the back of the guy's neck. He heard the satisfying crash as the man in the mask banged head first into a closed stall door. The door opened inward. The man flew into the stall and fell to the floor. "Had enough?" Dave asked, out of breath, because he never liked to leave a fight until his opponent had not only lost, but had also begged for mercy. Besides, he was still worrying about those purple high tops. This might be Teddy, the geek of all geeks. And if it was Teddy, Dave had already lost this fight just by letting a wuss surprise him the way Teddy had. If this was Teddy, Dave would pretty much have to kill him just to save face. "I said, had enough, sissy?" Whoever it was, he didn't answer. The stall door slowly swung back out. Dave strained his eyes to see the kid in the mask as he sauntered back out. Unbelievable. The guy appeared to be unscathed. Right then, Dave felt relief, because at least he knew he was up against a tough opponent. So Buzzy hadn't surprised him, after all. Then the guy charged. He hit Dave high, his arms wrapping around Dave's body like hoops of steel. They both went down. Hitting the floor knocked the wind out of Dave, which was one of the worst feelings in the world, as far as Dave was concerned. It was like getting punched in the lungs. He couldn't move or breathe, and all the time he was looking straight up into the hate-filled eyes of the man in the mask, and realizing that it was Buzzy after all. Teddy had seen enough wrestling matches to know what he was supposed to do next. He moved to the side, setting his body perpendicular to Dave's. He pressed Dave's back hard against the floor, making sure there was no airspace in between. He held him there, waiting for an imaginary ref to slap the floor to indicate a successful pin, waiting for the crowd to roar. During wrestling season, Teddy, who never went out for any team sports, assisted the coach and cut up orange sections for the wrestlers to eat right after their matches. Every time the crowd roared, it burned in his ears. They never roared for him. They didn't roar now either, and Dave was not moving. He was just making these tiny gasping sounds. That wasn't right. The victim was supposed to be struggling helplessly. Another wave of fury swept through Teddy's powerful body. Crooking fingers into claws, he ended his little wrestling session with a maneuver never seen on the rubber mats of Carville. He ripped out Dave's throat. Chapter 20. Kissing. Summer paused in the doorway. Slick? Slick was right. There were cobwebs everywhere. The white strands gave the old lodge a fuzzy look, like a movie that was out of focus. Summer panned the big dark room and saw the stone fireplace, the old sagging piano, the ratty vinyl sofa with the stuffing spilling out of it, but no Slick. Slick! She heard a sound in the far recesses of the room. and for the first time saw the stone archway. It led to another room. She didn't particularly want to go back there. It was dark enough in the front of the lodge. On the other hand, she couldn't help getting excited. Where was Slick hiding? With Slick, fear was just part of the game. She stepped into the room. Faded rectangular patches dotted the walls, spots where pictures had once hung. One or two pictures still remained, but she didn't step close enough to take a look. She certainly didn't get close enough to see that in place of each young camper's face was the grim, silently staring face of the young boy who had drowned, Jason Voorhees. More noise from behind the stone arch. Papers rustling. Or was it just the breeze wafting through the slats in the boarded-up windows? The floorboards were loose and creaked at every step. Summer was breathing heavily. This was too scary, she decided. It was no longer sexy. It was more like it was going to give her a stroke. Slick! A sudden loud fluttering overhead made her gasp, but when she tilted her head to look at the high arched wooden ceiling, she didn't see a thing. Just those endless cobwebs weaving slowly like underwater plants. She passed the sofa and then the piano, a rotted baby grand. The piano's black top was up, blocking her view of the bench and the keys. The darkness had deepened, so that now she had to keep her hands in front of her. Cobwebs kept attaching themselves to her face. She spat. She had been sort of planning, when she first came in, to do something outrageous and shocking, something that would surprise even Slick, like take her shirt off. But now the only thing on her mind was getting out of the lodge. She paused, one foot in the air. Then she turned. Though she couldn't have said why, she was about to bolt. Then someone started plinking out a dinky tune on the piano with one finger. Every note sounded wooden and horribly off-key, but she could still make out the tune. Slick, she said, turning back to the piano. It's nice of you to remember my birthday, but you're a month late. My birthday was in August, and you didn't call, I might add. Who are you talking to? Said a voice behind her. She spun back, right into Slick's arms, and before she could react, he was kissing her. One of the bad things about Slick Chambers was that there was so many girls around Carville who would vouch for the fact that he was an excellent kisser. The guys sure got around. On the other hand, one of the good things about Slick was that it was all true. He was an excellent kisser. Summer worked her fingers into his hair as she kissed him back. He lifted her off the ground and spun her around. Hey, he said. Hey yourself. He had taken her so off guard that it was only then that she remembered. She turned her head, trying to look back through the darkness at the piano. The playing had stopped. Who was... she began. Slick didn't answer. Instead, he bent down and scooped her up into his arms. I've prepared deluxe accommodations, he told her. You shouldn't have, she replied. Whoever it was who was sitting at the piano, Russ, Belinda, Missy, Summer decided they could play the piano to their heart's content. If they didn't mind intruding on her and Slick, she didn't mind either. Nothing mattered to her anymore. She thought idly about how she had been resisting this moment all day long, and how, now that it had come, it seemed foolish to have fought it at all. It was inevitable. Summer and Slick, Slick and Summer. They went together like burgers and shakes, or something. She laughed. What's so funny? Nothing. That is funny, he said. He was carrying her through the stone archway into what turned out to be an old abandoned office. There was a filing cabinet, its metal drawers open and empty. There was an old wooden desk set in an odd angle in the middle of the floor, its drawers removed. Part of the desktop had broken off, leaving a jagged, menacing edge. There were papers all over the floor in a circle around the desk. I cleared a little desk space for us, Slick explained, lowering her onto the desktop. "How romantic," Summer said. "You make me feel like a homework assignment." "I'm gonna get an A," Slick said. "I'll do the grading if you don't mind," Summer said. "Okay," Slick agreed. He was leaning over her like a doctor over his patient. Now he swooped down for a fast kiss. Too fast as far as Summer was concerned. He pulled his head back, looking at her, waiting. "B+, she said. Slick smiled briefly, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "All right," he said again. "Here comes an A." He started walking his fingers across the desk like a spider. His fingers moved across her stomach. They started walking up. She caught his hand, but now he swooped down for another kiss, pinning her body against the desk with his own. He held her hands over her head, kissed her endlessly until she finally had to turn her head away to catch a breath. But now he was kissing her neck, and she let out a moan, which she wished right away she hadn't done. Now it sure didn't matter what grade she gave him. He knew he had just aced the finals. He raised himself above her, supporting himself by the edges of the desk, when another piece of the desktop cracked off in his hand. Slick cussed, put his hand to his mouth. "Are you okay?" Summer asked. He kept his hand in his mouth, then took it out and peered at it in the darkness. "Sure, wants a little blood." "You're bleeding?" The thought of Slick getting so much as a hangnail suddenly seemed like the absolute worst thing in the world to her. Slick had won her totally, heart and soul, Summer realized. She could never fight it again. "You're going to have to get a tetanus shot, baby," she told him. "Nah." He ran a finger carefully along the jagged edge of the wood. "It's just wood, no nails." "So?" "So forget about it, all right?" he told her. And she did. For the next 10 minutes, she forgot about everything. Forgot about his cuts. Forgot about all her troubles and pains. Forgot about the person who had been playing the piano in the darkness. Forgot all the reasons why she had told herself she would never get back together with Slick. She also forgot the fluttering sounds she kept hearing overhead. Forgot. For her and Slick, it had been like this since Kiss 1. When they touched, sparks flew. It was as if their bodies might spontaneously burst into flames. Nothing could have pulled them apart. Not now. Nothing, that is, except Russ Johnson screaming at the top of his lungs. "Help!" Okay, so that was chapters 17, 18, 19, and 20 of Friday the 13th Road Trip. And you probably noticed a different voice at the beginning whenever the narration first started. That was my daughter, Alexis. Say hello, Alexis.
Hello.
Anyways, guys, what did you guys think of tonight's chapters? Looks like we lost Belinda. She took a tire iron to the back of the skull. Dave has had his throat ripped out. At least he got to go to the bathroom first, right? I mean, yeah. And on top of that, we find out that Slick and Summer can go at least 10 minutes when it counts. Apparently. That's what the book said. And we end the narration tonight with chapter 20 with Russ screaming bloody murder somewhere. But what about the person that's still in the room with him that was playing the piano? I guess we'll find out soon whenever I return with more of Friday the 13th Road Trip. Until then, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening, and be sure to check out the merch store, guys. You can get some great stuff there, walk around in slasher style while you're supporting the channel. And also, if you don't buy anything from there, then
it's got a death curse.
Have a great night, everybody.
Okay,
Stay there. Stay there. Hey! This is William Pattison, known to Friday the 13th fans as Eric Morris, and you are listening to 80s Slasher Librarian's narration of my book, Friday the 13th Road Trip. Enjoy. No.